Okay, welcome. A little bit early. Due to finish at 11:45, but if we do finish a bit before, since we're starting early, then so be it. Very lucky to see all of you today. Very privileged, we're very lucky to have such esteemed and experienced guests. Before I introduce the guests, I'm just going to set the scene. I think this plenary speaks for itself. I'm myself Chief Mine Action for OPT, Occupied Palestinian Territories, and recently just come out of Gaza. But even before we may move into talking about Gaza, we can reflect on a few other countries and the changing character of conflict that we've seen in the last perhaps 5 to 10 years, where this change of perhaps interwarring parties in the rural areas moving into urban centers. If we take Iraq and we think of northern Iraq, Nineveh Plains, Mosul, Tel Afar, Sinjar, huge contamination from armed groups putting in almost factory levels of production of improvised explosive devices, and of course then to dislodge those groups, large amounts of artillery, airdrop weapons, etc. onto those areas. Those areas are liberated, and returning population needs to go back. Huge challenges, local government, municipalities, aid workers, mine action sector. We can move over to more contemporary conflicts such as Ukraine. Think of East Ukraine and Kharkiv Oblast. Towns like Izium, Kharkiv itself, still under attack. Again, a series of different types of ordnance used there. Lebanon, South Lebanon, fortunately now in a ceasefire period, although it's fragile. And I'm looking forward to Brigadier's comments on this. And the Bekaa Valley as well. And finally, as I mentioned before at the start, what we can see in OPT in Palestine and in Gaza is significant levels of destruction, very complex environment, a population that cannot leave and has to move around, and it's a contested space. And huge challenges for the sector, and I can definitely tell you from UNMAS's perspective, in a place like that, it is massively challenging. So very fortunate to be here to set the scene and to talk to our esteemed guests, and to get into the sort of weeds of, I think, as the mine action sector, operations, logistics, policy, innovation and technology, and of course coordination. How does this all come together to meet the needs and the challenges we have in these areas? So I'll go into introductions of our guests. So firstly we have Ms. Mélanie Regimbal, Canadian, assumed her functions as Chief of Service of the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs, Geneva office, and also serves as Deputy Secretary General for the Conference on Disarmament. Ms. Regimbal has 25 years of multilateral disarmament, peace and security experience, including with the United Nations in Latin America and the Caribbean, and prior to joining the United Nations, Ms. Regimbal worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Canada. She also has a founding member of the Canadian Mine Action Team in Ottawa and continues to work in human security, disarmament and non-proliferation matters at the Permanent Mission of Canada, the Organization of American States, as the alternative representative in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Moving on, to my right, Dr. Ikteefa Al-Hasnawi is an administrative deputy in the Iraqi Ministry of Environment and currently serves as director of the Directorate of Mine Action, DMA. She holds a PhD in chemistry and brings over 28 years' experience in the nuclear field. Dr. Al-Hasnawi is also a former member of the Iraqi Council of Representatives. Thank you, shukran. Moving on, Brigadier General Jihad Bechelany has been actively involved in humanitarian mine action since the early 2000s. From 2016 to 2019, he held a position of commander of the Regional School of Humanitarian Demining in Lebanon. Since assuming the role of Director of Lebanon Mine Action Center, LMAC, 6 years ago, he has played a key role in advancing the center's mission and reinforcing its reputation on the international stage. Thank you. And finally, and last but not least, Valon Kumnova, at the end there, joined the Geneva International Center of Humanitarian Demining, GICHD, in September 2019. As the Director of Operation, he oversees the mine action ammunition management work, providing leadership and strategic steering for GICHD. Valon has worked in explosive ordnance risk education sector for over 2 decades, establishing and managing EO risk reduction programs in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, South Caucasus, Southern Africa, and Horn of Africa. Good to see you again, Valon. Okay, so in that, I'm going to lead into the first question, and I want to point this to Mélanie and Valon. So before going into specific country cases, we would like to understand the global impact of explosive contamination in urban areas, and it applies for the Mine Action Centre. Is the Mine Action sector ready to respond? Mélanie?
Thank you, Luc. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Bonjour. Buenos dias. I think it's impossible to think of what's going on in the world today without understanding that there's going to be a concrete impact on our sector in mine action. Geopolitical tensions around the world have made this one of the deadliest and most conflict-ridden times that we've been going through. We're seeing a surge and increase in military spending, a decrease in development spending, a breakdown of some of the basic principles of our multilateral security system, and the stigma around the issues that we're dealing with today is starting to erode. And so we are clearly in a very tenuous and difficult time, and this is going to have a very direct impact in the work that we do. At the same time, as these conflicts continue to expand and protract, we are looking at the deadliest amounts of casualties caused by explosive weapons, whether it's the WIPA per se, so the explosive weapons that are taking place in populated areas, or if it's from IEDs that are left over from ongoing conflicts. The impact is immediate, but it is also long-term. It has a clear impact on our ability to respond to these conflicts and to respond to the clearance. So as we are being asked to look at how mine action is going to be impacted, there is an immediate impact with the political structure that governs us, that is more fragile than it has been in past years. And there is an immediate funding impact on our ability to do our jobs. We are going to have to do more with less. And there is also a long-term impact in being able to respond to these conflicts and our ability to30 these impacts. The 2024 SG report on the protection of civilian talks about 30,000 civilians affected by explosive weapons in 2023. The difficulty that we have around data collection is also something that is going to make our work much more difficult because it's difficult to have access to the data and to the casualties and to be able to have a clear understanding of what is going on. And it just makes it so much harder. I think that this is the reality that we are in, but at the same time, this sector is one that is very resilient and has always been at the forefront of innovative thinking. The one advantage that we have as a sector is that it also is a collaborative sector in which we have broken down for the last 30 years the division between government, state, NGOs, civil society, working on these issues, international organizations, and I think that this is a strength that will help us get through what will be a very difficult, imminent future in trying to find ways to address and resolve these issues. So I think that this is the clear impact. We are not at all protected from what is going on in the wider context, and we just need to come together more than ever on these issues.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Luc, for that question. Good morning, colleagues. It's really good to see you in sunny Geneva. Luc, the question whether the sector is ready to respond, I would answer that with a categoric yes. That doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have anything to learn, but urban contamination isn't new to mine action sector. You yourself pointed out several examples in your opening remarks. The challenge we have is that when those areas get opened for work to take place, there is a huge amount of pressure for the work to take place very quickly. People need to come back to their homes, and therefore we don't have the luxury of waiting for a year or 2 years as one would normally do when one clears a minefield. So it's how do we overcome those challenges together? So on the technical side of things, it's very important that we're having the conversations on what standards do we apply for certain contexts. Obviously, international mine action standards were developed for a reason. They were developed to ensure that the work can be done as safely and efficiently, and there are standards there that codify very clearly in terms of the way the work on urban contamination should take place. Is the connectedness with the other agendas. Obviously, it points out to mine action, and it strengthens our argument that we've been making over 3 decades, that mine action is a precursor to many activities, whether that is reconstruction, rehabilitation, development, and so on. In many of these contexts, much of that work can't take place if those dots are not drawn together, and mine action doesn't follow through. Perhaps more on a technical level, it might be important to just sort of point out to a couple of things. The challenges are perhaps not necessarily just with what the urban environments present to our sector, but it's the type of contamination that we're dealing with and how hard it is to identify certain items when they are under rubble and so on, but also the types of tools that we might be able to apply to clear those areas. We see that in many of these contexts, for example, the use of serviceable explosives to remove the items in situ, they're not available. So it's great to see organizations such as Golden West working on non-explosive disposal systems, working with your good self and your office, Luke, on sort of trying to find solutions on how to dispose these items. We're learning a lot that we can also take out of the urban environments into the rest of the sector. So, for example, the work that the Explosive Ordnance Risk Education colleagues are doing on the conflict preparedness and protection. This is really born out of the need to address the rise of explosive weapons in populated areas, and therefore it can be utilized across the globe. So there is quite a bit that we need to do as a sector, but it's not that we're not ready. We've been there, we've done quite a bit of this. Personally, I can speak from an experience back in 2002 when Jaffna was completely mined as a city. 600,000 people had to come back to the city. We used innovative tools at the time, took the soil out of the place to make sure that the people can resettle within a period of 6 weeks, processed it, and then brought it back. So innovation will play a key part on this. Not just technological innovation, but the actual thinking, what methodologies we're applying, how we're coming together as a group to actually coordinate and share lessons, and codifying many of the lessons we've learned from contexts in 2000s, 2010s, early 90s in Afghanistan, and so on and so forth, to be able to tackle this challenge.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, both of you. I think that's you've captured that very well, and particularly just on experience recently out of Gaza, the policy and the standard trying to match the speed and pace again, and the equipment available, which could be quite lacking, and therefore these innovative techniques come in. But the demand, of course, the population trying to return is immediate, and sometimes these things can't keep up quick enough. Thank you. So I'd like to turn to Iraq and Lebanon, Dr. Ikteefa and Brigadier Bechelany. And I have a question for both of you, and I'll start with Iraq, and then we'll move to Lebanon. So cities of Iraq have been affected in different ways by conflicts. Lebanon has faced significant destruction in recent conflicts, as I mentioned earlier. Can you share how this has impacted urban areas and the people living there? Is mine action in urban areas different from mine action in rural areas? Additionally, how are the Directorate of Mine Action in Iraq and the Lebanese Mine Action Center addressing this contamination and supporting affected communities in adopting safer behaviors and rebuilding their lives? Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا. يشرفني أن أكون ممثلة
Thank you very
الجمهورية
much.
العراق
I am honored to be
في هذا
representing
الجمع
Iraq
المبارك الذي
during
نهدف
this
إليه
great
من
meeting
خلال
that we
التخلص
wait
من
for
الألغام التي أثرت
in order
تأثير
to
كبير
work
في العراق.
together to reduce
وأتقدم
the
بالشكر
risk of
الجزيل
mines
إلى
that
كافة
have caused
الدول
a lot of
المانحة
problems in
وإلى
Iraq. I
المنظمات
would like to
الدولية
thank all
التي
the
عملت
donors,
في
all the
العراق
international
متمثلة
organizations
بالأمم
that have
المتحدة
worked
التي
in Iraq,
قادت هذا الدور بشكل
led
إيجابي
by the
كبير في العراق.
United Nations that has
طبعا
had
في
a very
العراق تعرض
positive role in Iraq.
خاصة يعني
Iraq
المحافظات
has,
التي
and
تعتبر
particularly the
المحافظات
governorates
المدمرة
that are
من قبل
considered
العمليات الإرهابية
destroyed
لتنظيم
by
داعش
the
الإرهابي
terrorist
منذ
actions
عام
of ISIS
2014
Daesh since the year
وخاصة محافظة الموصل
2014,
التي تعتبر هي
particularly
قصة نجاح
Mosul,
في العراق
that is
من
considered a
خلال
success
الدعم
story in
الدولي
Iraq
والدعم
via the
المحلي
support,
الذي
the
أعطى
international and
نتائج
local
إيجابية
support
لهذه
that
المحافظة.
has borne
طبعا
very
المدن
positive
الحضرية
fruit
عندما
for this
تتعرض
governorate.
للعمليات
When
الإرهابية
cities
تكثر
and
فيها
urban areas
الألغام
are at risk,
والعنقود وإلى
there
آخره
are
من القذائف.
many attacks
وفي
that have
الموصل
happened on a
والموصل
terrorist
القديمة بالذات
level.
تعرضت
For
إلى الكثير
Mosul,
من
we have
يعني
suffered
البنى
from a lot
المهدمة
of cases of
وتدمير شامل أصبح
destroyed
بهذه المنطقة
buildings, of
وأصبح
mass
التلوث في
destruction.
محافظة
The
الموصل بما يقارب
contamination in Mosul
177
reached
مليون متر مربع وأكثر من
177
ذلك.
million square meters and
وبتكاتف
maybe
الجهود
even more.
أصبحت الآن
With the
الموصل
joint
القديمة
efforts,
تزهر
Mosul
بالتعليم وإعادة
became
100,000 طالب إلى مقاعدهم
again
الدراسية
a hub for
وكذلك
education
جامعة
where over
الموصل تم إعادتها
110,000
وتطهيرها
students went
وأصبح
back
الآن
to
التعليم في
their
هذه
schools
المحافظة
where
جيد
education
جدا
is
إضافة إلى
prosperous again.
هنالك الكثير من
Add to that
المستشفيات التي
that we
تم
have
تطهيرها
many
من الألغام
hospitals that have
وكلها
been
بجهود الدعم
cleared, and all
الدولي
of that
الذي
with the
كان
support of
الأمم
international
المتحدة ومنظمة
donors,
الUNMAS
with the
تشرف عليه
UN, with
بوجود
the
أيضا
UNMAS that has
الجهات المحلية الموجودة في
overseen
العراق.
the efforts along with
حقيقة
the
نحن
local
نأمل أن
groups
نكون
in Iraq. We
كما
hope
لمحافظة
that
الموصل
as
للمحافظات
Mosul
الأخرى وخاصة في
has had
محافظة
a
البصرة
positive success
التي هي
story,
تعتبر
we hope
أكبر
that
دولة
the
في
other
العالم
governorates will get the same as well.
ملوثة بالألغام
Basra
بما
is
يصل
the
إلى أكثر
biggest
من
city that is
5,000
contaminated with
كيلومتر
landmines.
مربع
We have over
وهذه المساحة
5,000
كبيرة
square
جدا.
kilometers
وفي
that are
العراق يوجد
contaminated,
لدينا
which is
ضحايا
a huge surface.
35
In Iraq,
ألف
we have
ضحية
35,000
و407.
casualties
هذا
and
الرقم مهول
35,407
ونحن دائما نقول لتمكين
casualties,
المرأة
which is a huge
أكثر من
number.
4,000 امرأة
We
هي
have
ضحية نتيجة
4,000
الألغام
women that are
وأكثرها في
victims
البصرة.
of landmines, and most
البصرة
of them
تعتبر
were
هي
in Basra.
الجهة
That is
الاقتصادية التي
considered
تدعم
the
العراق
economic
لكثرة يعني وجود النفط
artery for
فيها.
Iraq,
بالتالي
with
أغلب
the
المناطق
oil
النفطية
that
هي
is
ملوثة
there.
بالألغام.
And most of
فنأمل أن
the
يكون هنالك دعم
oil
دولي
areas are
لهذه المناطق.
contaminated
طبعا
with
بما
landmines. We hope
يخص
that there is international
التأثيرات
support for those
أثر
regions.
سلبا على
Regarding the
الجانب
negative
الاجتماعي
impact
من
or
خلال
the
وجود
social impact
يعني التهجير القسري خصوصا في المحافظات
through
المدمرة
the
اللي هي
coerced displacement,
محافظات كالموصل
particularly for
والأنبار
governorates
وكذلك
like
ديالى
Mosul,
وصلاح الدين.
Anbar,
وأيضا
Diyala, and
أثر
Salah
سلبا
ad-Din.
على الجانب الصحي
The
لوجود
negative
الضحايا
impact
ولدينا
was
مصابين
also on
كثيرين.
health, as we
وأثر
have a
سلبا على
huge
الجانب
number of
الاقتصادي لوجود
casualties on
معامل
injured
ومصانع مدمرة
persons, and
وبالتالي
it has
كثرت
also
البطالة
had an
وقل
impact
الاقتصاد
on
بهذا الجانب.
unemployment, with a huge
وأيضا
number of
تأثير على
factories
الجانب
that were
البيئي من
destroyed,
خلال
and
تلوث المياه والتربة
environmental impact
وأدى
as well
إلى
is
التأثير
to
على
be
التنوع
mentioned,
البيولوجي في العراق.
that
شكرا
has
جزيلا.
impacted the biodiversity in Iraq. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. It's very good to hear the efforts in Iraq and it's the progress that's being made there. I was there 5 years ago. Brigadier, I'd like to hear about Lebanon and obviously the recent challenges that you've experienced from the escalation of hostilities last year and the current ceasefire. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke, for this introduction and for your question. As you know, the last war in Lebanon has had devastating impact on towns, villages, and cities. Whole neighborhoods were totally destroyed. Villages were totally destroyed. Many areas are now contaminated by all kinds of war remnants. We cannot even identify one or two types. You have bombs, you have cluster bombs, you have mines, and weapons of all kinds. So we have a high contamination rate on the surface and under the rubble. So the direct impact is definitely, first of all, the displacement of a very considerable number of citizens from their towns, from their cities, from their neighborhoods to neighboring areas or to faraway areas within the country. This has created a considerable social crisis in Lebanon. This direct impact, which is forced displacement, and many people are unable now to go back to their hometowns, this has created a significant psychological impact within the victims. We have a considerable problem amongst those who don't have homes anymore, especially that those citizens, most of those are from the low income and the middle income classes. So they do not have the financial capacity to rent a new house or a new home. So this is the direct impact of the war. If we wanted to address the differences between the different regions, the inhabited, populated, or rural areas, the first difference is the type of the land and the soil, which is related to the type of survey that it is required, because this will require certain survey techniques to be available. The rural and populated areas have differences. It will be difficult to implement the usual demining procedures in the open space areas. In addition, we all know that people want to go home, but many people cannot go back home. They cannot go back to their schools, to their hospitals, and this requires us to work rapidly. We do not have the luxury of time, like my colleague has said. We don't have that luxury. We have to act swiftly because people want to go back home. A lot of people have even started themselves to clear their lands, even at their own risk and peril. They did not wait for an official operation to be in place for clearing the lands. In addition, clearing populated areas where you have huge buildings that have been brought down, and next to those, right adjacent to those buildings, you see populated areas, and this is an additional impediment. Also, when we talk about the rubble, removing the rubble, this will require specific capabilities, machinery, equipment, and these machineries need to be armored and able to work in contaminated areas, especially since within the buildings that are destroyed and under the rubble, we still have unexploded war remnants. In addition, we have another problem, which is the fact that citizens are removing the rubble themselves. They are not waiting for us to intervene. And the rubble that they are removing is a contaminated rubble. And so in the future, this kind of rubble will also create an additional clearing obstacle and will require additional efforts instead of just demining or clearing the rubble on the surface. This will require us to clear it, to put in place additional effort to clear those rubble.
إضافة لهالشيء لما بنحكي عن الردم والمناطق الملوثة بالردم.
The contaminated areas, particularly where there's considerable rubble and a huge problem there, we have to talk about the mineral remnants that is there that still impacts the tools and the impact, the equipment that we use. So I think that with time, the operations are going to become even more difficult, because instead of just working on clearing surface areas, we're going to have additional problem where trees and plants grow again, and this will be more problematic. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigadier. I think you made some very pertinent points and highlight the situation and the impact in South Lebanon and across the country very well. I think a really key thing you mentioned was the pressure for the social pressures and the economic pressures for local populations to return. Timelines are tight, and then they feel pressure to clear it themselves, to take it upon themselves. And mine action operators aren't in place, perhaps, or haven't got the bandwidth to be there ready to do that. And you've also mentioned the wider humanitarian and developmental social issues as well, lack of shelter, lack of income. So all these problems compound, and I think you captured that really well. So thank you very much for sharing that. I'm going to now move on to the next question, and back to Valon and Mélanie. So since the 1990s, mine action is framed by both specific provisions on the Humanitarian Disarmament treaties and a codification of good practices, in particular international mine action standards. I'm going to pass this to Valon first, if that's all right. Mix it up.
Thank you, Luke. No, indeed, we touched on this a little bit earlier. There are several standards, I'm sure many of you in the room know this already, that look at many of the aspects that we're discussing in the panel today. For example, there's a technical note, 10.10.3 on explosive hazard risk assessment and debris management, which was published in 2018. It captures the procedures that were developed by IMAS in Gaza. IMAS 913 also covers the building clearance, and more recently the IMAS 950 on mechanical land release was revised and obviously does take into effect some of the points that we're discussing here today. We think that the overall principles in terms of the standards, that they exist, they're there in terms of being able to utilize them. However, it's important to point out that international mine action standards are a guideline to how the work should be conducted. They have to be actually developed more into the national standards in terms of driving what the context of that particular country or territory actually dictates. So we are placing a lot more emphasis on the national mine action standards, because whilst the international standards do provide a good platform, the national standards really need to build on those context-specific issues. I think the issue of learning from IMAS to NMAS does work relatively well. It's perhaps vice versa, that it's not necessarily working as well as it should. It's learning from what's happening on the ground and making sure that those lessons are actually passed on and then codified onto international standards. It happens, but it does happen relatively slow. And we do need, in the world that is moving incredibly fast, with a very fast pace at this moment in time, need to find ways to ensure that actually lessons that we're learning are actually brought into international standards a lot quicker, so then countries in other parts of the world can actually benefit from that knowledge. So there is quite a lot of repository there in us being able to lean on. But as a sector that it's about 3.5 decades old, we like to pride ourselves in learning, and we just need to keep making sure that actually we are learning from what's happening on the ground, not necessarily shackle ourselves because something is written or codified somewhere. Learning is what we need to do because the context out there is very fluid. I'd like to point out maybe just a couple more things. One is the funding element and the importance of donors paying particular attention to the types of contamination that the organizations are actually having to deal with. At this moment in time, the costs of clearing an urban area are very different to the costs of actually clearing a field. known as a minefield. So it's important to also think about perhaps generating a slightly better understanding in terms of the costs associated with urban clearance. And then last but not least, we concentrate a lot, because this is a mine action meeting, on the mine action standards, but there is a lot on international ammunition technical guidelines that we need to pay attention to. We're very proud to be part of an initiative that we work together with UNODA on AMAT, and the version 4 of international ammunition technical guidelines is being worked on this year. And why that is important is that every time there is an unplanned explosion at a munition site, there's a tendency for these munition sites to be close to urban areas. They do cause contamination, humanitarian harm, and so on and so forth. So it's important for us to actually be across disarmament standards and perhaps look beyond IMAS themselves.
Thank you, Valon. I'm going to come back with a follow-on question to that, but before I do, Mélanie, please.
Thank you, Luke. And I think I'll start where Valon has left off. I think that the key here is, or the short answer to your question is, are the frameworks sufficient to be able to address mine action in urban centers? And the short answer is yes. The longer answer is we need to build on what Valon has just said, which is to, across all of the disarmament instruments and frameworks and the architecture that actually sustains these instruments, include facets of urban specificities to be able to address them. So the humanitarian disarmament frameworks that we have, whether they are under the Ottawa Convention, the cluster munitions, the CCW, the WIPA Declaration, even the Arms Trade Treaty, or any of the instruments that we have dealing with small arms and light weapons, all have an impact and a role to play in mine action, but also in mine action specifically as we look at it through the urban center lens and the impact and the way we have to slightly shift and adjust the way we do business. All of these instruments, whether legally binding or politically binding, have aspects of clearance, mine risk education, data collection, victim assistance, reintegration. The nomenclature from one instrument to the other may vary somewhat, but they all have the exact same essence at its core, which is human-centered, people-centered, protection of civilians. That's what is at its core. And they tie in very neatly to the wider multilateral framework that we have as an international community. Whether we look at it through the development lens and seeing how these instruments are tied to SDG implementation, or whether we look at it through a more peace and security framework to understand how the Pact for the Future, the commitments that we have, or even our peace-building, peacekeeping structure is put together. You can see how the Mine Action Center goes into each and every one of these. So I don't think we need to reinforce or reinvent our legal apparatus or multilateral apparatus to advance these goals, but rather just sit down, go back to some of the basic elements of these conventions and instruments and implement them thoroughly and convincingly as we have done so. From these instruments were born the need for the IMAS. These have really been at the core of everything that we have done, and I think it's sometimes good to pause for a second, go back and reevaluate these instruments and see how we can bring them back to operation and remind ourselves that that is there. And I think that that is particularly important as we're seeing some questioning around these instruments and the importance of these instruments. And so I think that as a community, we just need to go back to those basic messages and recall what we have, because the instruments that we have on the table are sufficient to get us across. Are there some components that could be specifically geared to urban centers and responses? Yes. For example, each of these instruments have coordinating committees that look at clearance efforts specifically, or victim assistance or resettlement issues. And I think that this could be an issue that could be flagged more clearly or increase the focus on. We have the CM REAP action plan that was just put into place, the Lausanne action plan, all of which have some of these urban components, and that of course we can continue to grow and expand. And if this is the area of focus that we want to, or the growth industry, which I think that by default we will need because of what is happening around the world, there is a structure around all of these instruments that allows us to do it. So it's just a matter of getting it done, and I think that this is something that this community has been particularly good at, is getting things going and moving on despite all of the obstacles. So I think we have the right tools in place.
Thank you. That's very insightful. I am going to just slightly pressure on that just a little, if that's okay. You mentioned the instruments, and that you've brought out, and you're saying generally you feel they're robust. How do you think they potentially be strengthened in a climate where, for instance, and you touched on urban areas, large airdrop weapons being used, very destructive, and we do have these tools in place, but can they be strengthened, or what's your thoughts on that? Thank you.
I think they just need to be implemented. We need to go back to the basic. It's a very simple message. We have been, as a community for the last 25, 30 years, been absolutely dedicated to implementing these instruments from all aspects and perspectives, whether we're sitting in government or international organizations or civil society. We have all done our part to implement these instruments, and I think that we just need to keep doing that and keep doing it louder and better, because the tools are there. So we, as from a UN perspective, we certainly need to recall what are the main rules of engagement, what are the main purposes of these instruments, bring people back to the table, ensure that forums like these are well attended and attended by everyone involved, not just by a small group of states or a small region of states, but rather from everywhere. And we need to ensure that the funding that is attached to these instruments continues. But I think in general these instruments are healthy and capable of going forth, but we just need to sit down and actually get our jobs done. And I think that this is something that we are all working towards. We don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Thank you, that's very clear. I'm surely going to come back to Iraq, but before I do, I said I'll come back to Valon on standards. There was a very frequent and very pragmatic question about reporting land release efforts in urban areas. Should we report square meters or cubic meters?
Yeah, thank you, Luke. I wasn't prepared to answer that question, but I will answer.
Sorry, it's
no, it's good.
We were early, so we've got some time to throw a few in.
It's a great question. It's a great question. This is one of the areas that I'm actually talking about our sector being able to adapt. It's very different if one clears 1 hectare of a very populated and very urban area versus a 1 hectare of a field with no buildings in it. And the adjustment to the funding modalities and the appreciation of the balance of effort that it actually takes to be able to clear one area or land release one area versus the other is probably something that we need to work more on to advocate, to understand the complexity and the challenge that exists out there. I guess in terms of what is reported, it will depend on what the national authority actually wants to be reported. At the end of the day, the output is an output. We have advocated for a long, long time that we need to become more of an outcome-based sector and ensure that, releasing, 100 square meters where 2 houses will be built may take 6 months to actually clear it. But the benefit that comes out of that is we need to get better at articulating it. So it will depend from the context in terms of what the national authority would like to report on. The land release at the moment caters towards the square meters. But if there is principal requirements to report cubic meters for whatever reason, because it connects with different agendas and so on, this is the learning part that I'm talking, that it needs to come from the ground to the international standards where it can be debated and then codified if it's necessary. our principal answer or advice from GICHD would be better understanding of balance of effort that it takes to clear urban areas. I mean, we can just see on the photos the complexity of what that would take. And then perhaps in the end should matter less about whether it was square meters or cubic meters. It should matter more about how people are benefiting from that and how that's contributing towards the reconstruction and building the resilience of communities. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it certainly does, and we'll have a longer conversation on this, I think, in reference to what's going on in Gaza and what might come next, and what we've seen in the ceasefire. Brigadier, you wanted to come in there. You raised your hand. Anything to add from a Lebanese perspective?
I would like to clarify a small idea when it comes to the square meter or cubic meter. When it comes to clearing populated areas, I think it's a very complex procedure and we cannot adopt the square or cubic meter. I give you an example. When I talked about the citizens who are not waiting for us, they come and clear their land or clear the rubble, and they give us a whole pile, a hill of rubble that we have to deal with. While if I want to clear the current territories as they are without the interference of the municipalities or of the citizens, this will require maybe 1 or 2 days. But once they gather them in a hill and all the rubbles, this will require maybe months. And also, sometimes we have the remnants of a bomb that has penetrated 15 meters into the ground. This sometimes requires a whole month before we can clear that bomb. So I think that in this area, the surface is not really important. Talking about cubic or square meter is not important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful. I'm going to open up, so before we move to the audience, I'm going to have one more question for Dr. Hasnawi, and it's on IMAS 7.13, environmental management. I want to draw out your experience on this, and climate change in mine action, and it's recently been revised as of last year. So the question I have is, would you have any recommendations concerning integration of the considerations of mine action intervention in urban areas in the context of Iraq? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. When it comes to the question raised, can you hear me, says the speaker? When it comes to the question raised, before starting the demining process, we conduct a comprehensive environmental assessment before initiating any demining operations in urban areas. We need to conduct a full environmental assessment to identify the threats, the challenges, and put in place plans that will mitigate the negative impact. Of course, there are, for example, environments where you have green areas or humid areas or wetlands. So you need to identify the specificities, and we need to assess the soil and water contamination that resulted from the unexploded devices. And we need to analyze the mining procedure and their impact on the environment and biodiversity. Climate change impact, given all the wars and the conflicts that Iraq has faced, and also the terrorist attacks, we have seen that there are wide areas that are negatively impacted by the environment. When it comes to the procedures that we have in place, we try to use eco-friendly methods in demining operations in rural areas. We try to reduce or mitigate the environmental impact by using robots and drones. We try to to improve the demining operations through technologies. And also we work on analyzing soil through natural procedures. We also use a secondary explosive device clearing and removing. When it comes to waste management resulting from the demining operations, we try to classify the waste, hazardous waste, hazardous waste, and put in place the suitable procedures. And we try to integrate mitigation, climate change mitigation procedures by reducing CO2 emissions. Demining operations in rural areas should be based on strategies that will reduce the carbon footprint, like using the electrical complexes and the use of renewable energy. Also, regreening the impacted areas after clearing the land. We need to work on reforestation, on creating new green surfaces and areas. This is a step that is a test for the soil. If the plants survive, then the soil is a good soil. Otherwise, the soil would require additional treatment because it is still contaminated. Also, when it comes to floods and desertification, some areas contaminated with mines are faced with additional challenge resulting from desertification and floods. So green infrastructure, regreening, the rehabilitation of soil should be integrated in the reconstruction strategies, and this is what Iraq is focusing on. We need to integrate also the local communities, work on environmental awareness in collaboration with the local communities and focusing on awareness campaigns. When it comes to awareness campaigns and programs in Iraq, we have integrated mine action in all school curricula in collaboration with the Ministry of Education. There are also 42 awareness campaigns throughout the Iraq to raise awareness as to the risks of mines. In addition, we integrate environmental considerations in national policies and local legislations. Relevant authorities and the mine action parties cooperate with the government to make sure that the operations in place take into consideration environmental sustainability and work with environmental organizations and NGOs in order to put a sustainable framework in place for the rehabilitation of contaminated areas. And IMA 1.7.13 has helped us to focus further on integrating environmental considerations in demining efforts, particularly in urban areas, and that will require adopting a comprehensive framework that will include environmental assessment and the use of eco-friendly mechanisms, good waste management, and integrating resilience, climate change resilience activities, collaborating with local communities and adopting environmental adapted strategies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That was exceptionally insightful, and particularly in a country like Iraq that has this dual challenge of contamination and environmental climate change issues. And I thank you for bringing out the importance of liaising and interacting with local communities, and at the same time, the importance of risk education as well, and that consultation. We're in the last few minutes of the plenary. To that end, I jotted down a few notes of what we took away, but rather than reel them off, I think that's all well captured by all of you. Use the opportunity of this MDM. I think there's so much to discuss here on so many levels. People's experience, what we had here in the panel. I know various teams out here, the INGOs, etc., UN. Please, I think just share. I think there's so many points to draw out which we can't capture here in the session. Certainly in the next 4 minutes, we certainly can't. So to that end, I'm going to get to the conclusion. Before I do, I'd just like to take one line from each member, the bluff if you like, and Valon, I'll go to you and then we'll work our way down back to me. Thank you.
No, thank you, Luke. One line is, we've got a challenge, but we can do it. We've been here before. So let's get together, share, and make sure that we tackle this challenge together.
In one line, I'd say break the silos, work together. I think that that's the most important thing. We have the right tools. We just need to use them all and put them all on the table so that we can go forth together.
From the lessons that we have learned, I think the most important one for the urban areas is to intervene quickly for the risk mitigation and to convince people that they should not take the initiative on their own. We need to focus also on awareness, planning, training, unifying efforts, financial support. With all of that, we can face any challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, all of you. Shukran Katir. It's been, I think, a very useful and insightful session. Just some quick notes. There are side events related to the topics discussed. Today at 13:15, how can mine action operators best support reconstruction in urban environments that have suffered devastation during conflict? Tomorrow, and at 1100, saving lives through coordinated action, mine action, AOR's role in complex crisis. Coordination has been a key thing, so I think that'll be very interesting. And I mentioned it before, on Friday at 1100, there'll be our runners side event on Gaza, saving lives, enabling humanitarian response, and rubble removal as well. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you, and I'm sure I'll see many of you over coffee in the coming days. Thank you.